Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today is indeed a day of celebration. It is July 4th, 2012, and of course, we typically know it as the American Independence Day. However, today there is another great achievement to celebrate. It is the ultimate humiliating defeat in the European Parliament of the misnamed Anti-Counterfeiting Trade Agreement, or ACTA, which has been looming over us, threatening to deprive us of internet freedoms for many years now. The European Parliament voted to reject it by a resounding margin of 478 votes against it to 39 votes in favor of it. With the failure of the EU Parliament to ratify ACTA, the treaty is essentially dead. While the treaty was signed on October 1st, 2011, it still requires the ratification of 6 of the states that signed it. The EU has now rejected it completely, and while in theory it may still be possible for the United States and a few of the other smaller countries that signed on to it to ratify it, countries like Morocco or Singapore or Mexico, there has been considerable opposition in those countries as well. So, really, ACTA is dead. And good riddance, because had ACTA come into force, it would have been devastating for the last bastion of true freedom and the greatest hope for human progress, the internet. In 2010, more than 2 years ago now, I wrote an essay called ACTA, The War on Progress, Freedom, and Human Civilization, and I invite you to revisit that essay to learn just how bad life on the internet would have been had ACTA come into force. ACTA, under the guise of enforcing intellectual property, would have stifled free speech online. It would have ended the presumption of innocence for millions of online users. And it would, in effect, have created a stigma against the use of the internet, creating an underground culture of people who still wanted to use it, while many respectable people, or people who desired to seem respectable, would have avoided it, not because they had any criminal intent, but because they just didn't want to go there, didn't want to even run the risk of getting into trouble. ACTA would have given governments around the world sweeping arbitrary powers to monitor, censor, and penalize individuals. And I am so pleased that in Europe a massive movement in opposition to ACTA arose, in part motivated by the massive movement in the United States in opposition to such travesties as the Stop Online Piracy Act and the Protect IP Act, which thankfully were also defeated earlier this year. This is excellent news, because we have seen now, several times in close succession, the people rising up against special interests in order to defeat oppressive legislation that would have limited the liberties of consumers. And I hope that this continues, because political systems throughout the Western world and outside of it are currently dominated by special interests who use their inside connections to politicians, who use the fact that they have historically had greater access to information, and they've attempted to hold on to that access to information for as long as possible. They've used that in an attempt to silence us and put us at a disadvantage. With the internet, the very engine of progress and liberation that these special interests are trying to thwart, this is becoming an increasingly less feasible model for them. And my great hope for the upcoming years is that the old model of politics and the old model of business, as represented by the big media, the big record companies, the big film studios who attempt to penalize us in draconian ways just to maintain their obsolete business models. It is my hope that all these models collapse dramatically and are replaced by a decentralized, participatory culture that ennobles and elevates every one of us from the status of a mere passive consumer of junk of the lowest common denominator to the status of creators, people who esteem themselves and who work actively to bring something into this world for their own enjoyment, but also for the enjoyment of others. It is my hope that this new era of the decentralized internet will also create a dramatic movement toward liberty in other areas of life. Economic freedom, greater civil liberties, reduced militarism, increased interconnectedness throughout the world by means of economic exchange, cultural exchange, the ability of people to really relate to one another as individuals, irrespective of their nationality, irrespective of their religion, irrespective of the many circumstantial barriers that have led people to unjustifiably despise one another throughout history. All of this is possible with the free and open internet. And I would like to thank my friends in Europe, the many, many activists who helped not just to achieve an increased measure of freedom for Europeans, but for people throughout the world. Perhaps the new meaning of July 4th will be the day that Europe declared independence from the special interests in the United States that have tried to choke creativity throughout the world. And perhaps soon, we in the United States will be able to declare independence from those same special interests as well.